Hello, and welcome back to the Anima Leadership Cafe, a space where we talk leadership, equity, and creating workplaces where everyone can thrive. Each session, we explore insights and strategies that allow us to tap into our personal wisdom and collective strengths. So if you're looking to build healthier, more equitable, and interdependent relationships with yourself, your team, and your organization, you're in the right place. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you're the first to see when a new video is released. With that said, welcome to the Anima Leadership Cafe series.
Welcome to this very, very special Anima Cafe, and we are looking at the second part of doing a part two of the Just Compassion framework. And I'm so delighted that Loretta Ross will be joining us. Her and I have been co-hosting these conversations with activists from both Canada and the US over the last year. And Loretta, hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. So, friends, for those that weren't here last month, I did an introductory session just to get a sense of to share with you some of the thinking that had been um, developed in this collaboration with Loretta and a whole group of activists from North America, and we'd been in this year-long conversation, and uh, the outcome of that was the Just Compassion framework. And we'd been talking for some time. And just to set things off, Just Compassion, we simplified it to, and I put it into chat, is a way of working towards human rights and justice goals using an ethos of love, fairness, and forgiveness to get us there. So, Loretta, I thought it might be useful for us to just have a brief conversation about um, why this was an important project for us to embark on, this idea of bringing compassion and bringing a compassion focus into justice work. So I'm going to pass it over to you and have you share a few thoughts.
Well, thank you. Obviously, if you watch what's going on in the world, and particularly in the United States, we've got the resurgence of white supremacy and fascism. And what we do know is that we can't use the master's tools of hatred, bigotry, anger, and win because, frankly, our opponents are much better at hatred, bigotry, and anger. So we would never win in that kind of contests. But what we are better at is showing true empathy, showing true compassion, seeing what a unifying force it can be for humanity. Love always wins over hate, but it's very painful to wait to watch the devastation that happens when the forces of hatred are in power. But it's about building what Shakil likes to quote Dr. King's beloved community, where we see each other as each other's relatives. I mean, I'm one of those people that have been convinced by science that all human life began in Africa. So I have a tendency to see the whole world as my long distant cousins, as opposed to seeing us separated into tribes and into competing interests and things like that. And one more thing I'll say before turning it back over to Shakil. For me, this isn't theory. In my political life, as a rape survivor, I taught Black feminist theory to men who were incarcerated for raping and murdering women. In the 1990s, I monitored hate groups, and it became part of my job to deprogram white supremacists. And so I learned through experience that it's possible to have very productive conversations with the most unlikely people. And I think that's what's going to be necessary for us to triumph over fascism, colonialism, and all the isms that are facing us today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And again, a plug for Loretta's book. Loretta's incredible life stories and the learning are just so well cataloged and expressed through stories in the Calling In book. And it's just so, so fabulous and so not just insightful, but very inspiring. And so just we've had Loretta on before, and we've talked about her book. But if you've not been part of that process, I just want to really amplify that. So what we did was we gathered some folks in Washington, D.C. Last August, and we, for a number of reasons, the group ended up being a little bit smaller than we had hoped, but still the conversations were very rich. And we ended up then convening monthly conversations with basically like a steering group. And Suzanne Hawks is part of that. Vanessa Reed has been part of that. Caroline Blackwell has been part of that. As well as Isabel Clark um, from the Builders Organization. So there's been a handful of us that have been gathering regularly and updating the larger group as well. And so what we did was we identified the need for creating a framework that had a compassion as well as justice centered focus. And what we did was I'm going to share my screen. We came up with a few key things that were important. We said that the need for just compassion, this was specifically talking to the progressives, folks that are involved in human rights and justice work, is that we said, there's a number of things that we've also experienced in these conversations over time, identified at least 8 things, that there was goal confusion frequently, that sometimes people fighting for human rights and justice, we can care more about being right than actually making a difference. That we're often hard to understand, and that social change makers, activists, we can be inaccessible. We're too academic or judgmental, which makes it hard for people to understand us or even want to be connected to us. That frequently there can be hurt relationships that progressives can just as quickly turn against each other, and we sometimes, without intention, can behave like the very people and systems we're trying to change. And in the context of justice work, we also identified that justice education often makes people feel shamed and blamed instead of helping people grow and learn through content that's both complex and emotional. Loretta, anything you want to add to those?
No, thank you. You have basically distilled the need for calling in and for just compassion. But I do want to just emphasize that it's not enough to be right. We also have to be strategic in our desire to get the power to stop human rights violations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Uh, we identified a few other, 4 other items as well. We realized that over time, there's a fear of speaking up that, as much as the work around justice is trying to get more people on board, um, there's inadvertently, there's been a little bit of the culture of fear where people are scared to ask questions or say what they really think for fear of being judged or misunderstood or shunned, that there's underdeveloped skills. We've overdeveloped head skills, knowing the right answers, but underdeveloped heart skills, the need for right relationships, right actions, and robust strategies. That perfectionism purity has frequently um, uh, become amplified through unrealistic standards that are being set for words, behaviors, and actions. And sometimes that creates a culture of rigidity, of self-righteousness, and even cynicism. And lastly, we also identified that persuadables are pushed out. That it's really hard to make change if people who should generally be on the side of justice or are in the middle or questioning are made to feel excluded or meant to feel bad or pushed away. So those were um, uh, the other 4 themes that emerged. And there's many other ones, but these are the big ones that kind of came out that said we need to create a new framework that integrates justice with compassion, complexity, and so this was some of the other motivating pieces. Loretta, anything you want to add to these?
of knowledge that people need in order to fulfill this vision. And that's a deep knowledge of human rights and its power. A lot of people are familiar with the phrase human rights, but they're not familiar with the content of human rights, particularly the applicable categories that provide protections, the ratified treaties, laws, standards, and norms that I think is the best antidote to fascism. As a matter of fact, the entire human rights framework in its modern form was to hopefully stop the types of genocides that happened during the Holocaust. And so I think activists suffer from a lack of knowledge around the human rights framework. But the second thing that they suffer a lack of knowledge around is fascism itself. We're endlessly confused, calling it authoritarianism, not knowing whether it neatly equates to what happened with Nazi Germany or Italy under Mussolini. We dither around, not calling a spade a spade. And that means that there's always an understatement of the threat until it's too late. And so those are two bodies of knowledge that I think we should add to that. Uh, Excellent PowerPoint, by the way.
Mm, thank you. That's great. That's all developed by my team. Thank you. This has been our conversations distilled down. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to share with you the 10 principles we have come up with uh, for just compassion. And then what we're going to do is before we get into the details of what those are, we're actually going to, because part two today was to share with you a design and assessment tool. Okay, so I'm gonna describe the 10 principles, then we're gonna take 5 minutes and a link is gonna be dropped in and you're gonna actually complete the assessment tool. And then we're gonna be able to talk about the principles and its uses. And we thought the assessment tool might be a good starting point. Okay, so let me share with you. Um, so just compassion um, is a way of achieving human rights and justice goals using the ethos of love, fairness, and forgiveness to get us there. Okay, so the principles to achieve that vision we identified these into goals, um, mindsets, skills, and strategy. So um, we identified that there was two big goals. One was to end injustice, and the second was to build beloved community, and these are interrelated. We believe there's a mindset that there are three areas that are mindset goals, which is or principles, which is accountability from compassion or through compassion, the embracing of imperfection, and that integrity matters. We also identified that there were three just straight up skill-based areas where we develop skills in relational intelligence, conflict competence, and complexity thinking. And lastly, that um, there are two areas that we identified as strategies, the idea of diversity of tactics and expanding the tent. Now, we're going to go over these in detail. Again, I introduced these last time, but before we get into conversations about these, my team is going to drop a link because we have developed a assessment tool that you could use. You can use this in the context of teams, coalitions, organizations. It's really a conversation starter. But for you to understand it, we just best thought we'd share it with you and you can fill it out. So I want you to think about an organization you're working with or coalition that you're in, a team you're working with, and I want you to answer as best you can the 10 questions that are here. Shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes to do. Right. Okay. Um, if you are still finishing, please go ahead. We're going to just get started with the conversation part. I think most people are finished at this point. Um, so, Loretta, I'm going to welcome you back in, and I know that in probably about another minute, James is gonna, on his back end, he'll close it. He'll let the last few people finish that want to still finish, and then he's going to do some tabulations for us and give us at least some numbers as we go through, which will be a really wonderful look. So, Loretta, and just for my team, I'm assuming that we've got Loretta and I will be highlighted, so we're both visible and accessible to everybody. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through some of um, the principles now, the 10 principles in a bit more detail, and Loretta and I will talk about them. And I'll share my screen for a portion, and then we'll just sort of talk. And in the background, James will then be doing the calculations, and we'll come back. We'll have some conversations with that. So, Loretta, um, I'm going to go through here, and these are the two goal-based principles that we had. One was really important in the justice world, which is to end injustice. And the vision in terms of a world that's fair for all starts with learning to see how groups and identities are impacted by power, influence, and opportunities, race, gender, class, and then also wanting to do something about it. And while that goal is frequently expressed in the context of justice work, um, we frequently talk about, for example, anti-racism, the idea of like ending racism. We're frequently anti many things, but what are we for? And so this idea of um, building beloved community, the idea that our daily practices name and model the goal of building resilient, joyful communities, that doesn't get amplified. Like, what are we replacing it with? If there's racism and that's where the system is, what do we want that looks different? Well, we don't articulate that enough in the justice world. And so the idea of building communities that can repair harm and heal divisions, that are resilient and joyful, that we felt that was a really important part of of the um, of the goals we should also be striving for. Loretta, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, one of the things that the civil rights icons that I know and knew, because many of them are sadly passed, always said that we didn't never prepare for winning. We only prepared for the situations that we were in, and we weren't prepared for what comes after. And Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator, also spoke about how if we don't prepare for winning and can envision the world we would create if we won, then there's a real risk of the oppressed becoming the oppressors because we will replicate what we've been through rather than dare to dream a better world. And then we'll self justify all the replication of oppression that we will commit simply because we fought for equal opportunity to oppress others
Right,
instead of fighting to end all oppression.
right, right. And history bears this out. Bears this out over and over again. I mean, I think about my people's history in the context of India and Pakistan, where my ancestry lies. And in India, uh, the British were kicked out, but Hindu nationalism is alive and well today. Next door in Pakistan, where there's a Muslim majority, the most oppressed groups include other Muslim groups, right? So this plays out over and over and over again. And in any context, the important question becomes, if a group has now come into power, um, how well are the minorities in that context treated? Are they treated any better? And we see this in a macro level, you see this on a micro level. And micro level, if you take a look at research into gay neighborhoods, for example, that gay neighborhoods were designed for gay white men, and people identify as lesbian, as trans, were excluded. People who were not white, male, and gay were excluded. So we see this over and over again. So the idea of becoming the other is such a trap that we can all fall into just because we can live in our own oppression or live in our own focus. So the idea of building beloved community is so important. Um, we had some mindset principles that I'd like to share. These ones include, and you answered these in your survey as well. Accountability from compassion, that to fix broken systems and unfairness, we need to be compassionate to ourselves and others, but also take responsibility for the harm we may cause. The embracing of imperfection, that the recognition that vulnerability is a strength, and that we embrace the messiness of our lives rather than striving to be the perfect activist or person who always knows what to say and what to do, like there's always a right answer. And that integrity matters. Acting with honesty, trustworthiness, and strong moral principles is essential. That means doing what's right even when it's difficult or unpopular, and taking responsibility and admitting to our mistakes. Loretta, thoughts to these? Any additions you'd like to add?
Well, yes, people don't necessarily see compassion and vulnerability as the strengths that they are, because it really takes a strong person to admit that they're fallible, that they actually can have hope in the world, can exhibit compassion to each other. These are strength based practices. You'll find that it's the weakest people who can't admit that they've made a mistake. It is the people who lack integrity that think that they're right and everybody else is wrong, kind of thinking. And you find that it's usually the dumbest person in the room that thinks they're the smartest person in the room. And so we have to stop allowing these language coups and these inversions to take place. But a lot of people don't lead with their integrity, don't lead with their truthfulness out of fear. So doing this work of just compassion is going to have to address those very fears. Their fears are very real, that people are socialized into feeling that, well, if I show that I'm um, vulnerable or indecisive or one of those things, then people will take advantage of me or harm me. And so, since those fears are real, part of this work has to be to address those fears. We just can't declare that these things don't matter.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you. We had 3 skill-based principles as well that we identified over time, which was that there's a deep need for relational intelligence, that to build a better world, we just have to get good at understanding ourselves and others. So self-awareness is part of that journey, self-control, healing from pain, as well as skills that include listening deeply to others and recognizing acts of kindness, even when those acts of kindness are delivered poorly. And so, intention behind kindness is also important. Conflict competence is so important because we just need to get good at working through disagreements, misunderstandings, and conflict, especially with those that we disagree with and who act and think differently than us. And complexity thinking, the idea that social problems aren't simple, and we need to develop the ability to hold multiple points of view, to develop a type of fluidity, um, and learning to that means also learning to be okay with uncertainty, not always having clear answers. Loretta, your reflections on anything you want to add to these?
Well, I want to tell a story about from my online calling in trainings. I do have a course that's ongoing right now if anybody's interested in going to my website and signing up. Um, One of my participants is blind, and she said that every time she had to go up a step or through a door, this hand would come out of nowhere and put it on her body to help her. And she would always go ballistic when this happened because she was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. So having a hand that she couldn't even see placed upon her body just triggered her totally. But she didn't like that reaction that she had. That's what you call, understanding complex thinking and also interpreting kindness in a different way. So she asked what she could do, and I told her the 3-step calling in process, which is number one, thank them for their attempt to be kind, because you want more kindness in the world. You don't want less. You don't want to discourage people from being helpful. But number two, set your boundary. Tell them, I don't like strange people laying their hands on me, but I want to thank you for your attempt to help. And then number three, turn it into an opportunity for calling in more conversation. But if you'd like to help somebody in the future, do you mind if we take a minute and talk about what you can do the next time you encounter a blind person? So it's not hard if we have emotional self regulation, what they call emotional intelligence, to then set us up for integrity and relational intelligence. But it really does matter recognizing our to recognize our triggers, not put the worst interpretation on everything because that's our default,
Mhm.
and to understand how to focus on what people do well and encourage more of that than always offering that critical voice decrying what they do badly.
Mm. Mm. Um, Loretta, can you just share? You always have a really pithy way of talking about something about kindness done badly.
Well, that's what we call it. It is called bad kindness or kindness done badly. It's an attempt to say something nice or be nice, but the people are so awkward or are illiterate when they do so. I think a lot of microaggressions can be described as bad kindness. I know when I first started drawing dreadlocks in 1980, a lot of people hadn't heard of Bob Marley or dreadlocks. And they used to look at my hair and they said, that's a very interesting hairstyle. Do you wash it? And it was an attempt to make a comment or sometimes, ask a question. But it could be read as an absolute microaggression because my back then when I was in my 20s, I used to say, "Yeah, I wash my hair. Do you wash yours?" But now that I'm older, I'm in my 70s, when I hear those kinds of ignorant questions, I tend to assume the best of the people and try to answer it with kindness because I don't like to let other people set my mood.
Mm. Mm. That's so well put. And, it's one of these things where I think, and very importantly, in the justice world, we talk to, you hear a lot of people and still today say, impact matters more than intent. And that really is important. That impact does matter more than intent. Um, at the same time, intent also matters. And so both things can be true. It depends on the circumstance. And so, mainstream society for a long time would brush off all kinds of microaggressions by saying, but that wasn't my intention. And so in the justice world, we're like, yeah, but impact matters. However, if we also just live in the impact is the only thing that matters, then we reduce the kindness done awkwardly, the kindness done clumsily. Um, but it's still kindness that may show up, and people don't always know. And so amplifying, amplifying kindness, but also knowing when impact is the thing we need to talk about, and also not losing track of intent as well. So there's ways that we can get polarized depending on what our training is.
But
Um,
Shakil, do
yeah.
you know we have a tendency as human beings to give the benefit of the doubt to people we identify with
Mm,
and not give the benefit of the doubt to people we don't identify with.
right.
And so we tend to overstate the impact of somebody if we don't identify with them, and
Mhm.
we tend to understate the impact if we do. And so
Right.
we have to bring that into conversation too. Why do we have these relational judgments of impact as opposed to having more universal judgments of impact? Because how we respond to people, to humanity, shouldn't be based on who we know and who knows us.
That's right.
It actually should be based on a deeper set of integrity values as opposed to relational ones.
Mhm. And so this is amplifying the last point around complexity thinking, that we want to be able to bring in all of these different dimensions into the conversation rather than a straight up right wrong. And frequently there's just so much complexity in situations. So do we have we developed the skills, the self-regulation skills, the thinking skills? Do we have the knowledge of how oppression works and microaggressions and the patterns and how they play out? So we can take responsibility because, again, compassionate accountability is also one of the principles. So none of these stand on their own. They all work interchangeably and interconnectedly. I'm going to share the last couple of ideas, and then we'll get to James and what we see in our in our document. So the last thing is the idea of diversity of tactics, that there's no one right way to make change. There's just hundreds and thousands of different approaches that are required, and we should respect each other even when we don't agree on our strategies. And expanding this tent, and this is a strategy because to make the change we want to achieve human rights and justice goals, we have to find ways to bring different people together, even with those that don't uh, uh, agree with us, because we want to build big, strong communities that fight for fairness. Loretta?
Yeah, I want to deal with number 10 because I don't think people understand how to categorize in a complex way all of our allies. I think we're pretty clear on how to find opponents. They're the ones who delight and profit from cruelty and meanness. We have no problems in many ways defining them. But we get confused when it comes to defining our allies because I think they come in three different categories. There's our proven allies, people we've been through a lot of stuff with. So they're our ride and die people. We know they won't run in the face of hardship because we've been through stuff. We know who they are. And there's our problematic allies, who are people that focus on different things, don't necessarily share the precise worldview that you do. The people who think climate change is more important than women's rights or racial justice is more important than indigenous rights, but we basically share a worldview. We just focus on different things. I call those our problematic allies, or we disagree on tactics and strategy. But the largest set of people that we have to really sharpen our organizing skills to deal with are our potential allies. These are the people who will put up a Black Lives Matter sign, and that, as far as we can tell, that's all that they do. Because we don't think they're doing enough. We're the ones that we call them performative. But the reality is that once they put up that Black Lives Matter sign, you already know the one thing you need to know about them. They're not in the Ku Klux Klan. They're not enemies. They may be, and they're potential allies, or the people who regret, like what we're dealing with here in the States. People who are regretting their votes for Trump right now because the consequences are landing on them in ways they didn't expect. Well, obviously, we're going to have to figure out how to work with these potential allies and not let them be readhered back into the fascist movement since they were so successfully manipulated. And if that alarm clock goes off for them, then we need to be there to offer them a place of belonging, a sense of inclusion without FAFO, that they effed around and found out kind of I told you so stuff taking place. Because we
Mm,
can't call ourselves organizing a just compassion movement if we can't practice what we preach.
mhm. It's great. Thank you. So much in there. All right, so James, I want you to get lined up. I want to say that there's a number of ways that you can use just compassion. I'm going to highlight a couple of them, then we're going to go into the one that we're going to focus on today. You can use this in group formation stages when groups are first coming together. It can be facilitate or back pocket. This is what you can use when you're supporting groups or clients and bring out principles as questions, as observations to guide when you're seeing interventions that might be necessary. It can be part of program and strategy development. You can use this to develop leadership competencies, um, campaign planning and power mapping for people grassroots organizers using to influence social policy? How do you develop the non-adversarial mindsets to be able to work and develop your campaigns? This is a way. And the last one is as an assessment reflection tool, as a conversation starter. So that's what we're going to do today. James, I'm going to line you up. Share with us what the results were. And as James starts sharing the results, well, I'll kind of go through them. And I just love your reflections in chat as you start seeing the results, because I want you to think about the average that's mapped out here, and then how your organization or coalition or group that you were thinking about might map up against that. So let's take a look at the 10 different principles as mapped out here. And so take a look and see, first of all, what the patterns are. Let's see, on a 5-point scale of never to always. Can you just make it, yeah, pull it over, perfect, thank you. Um, First of all, just take a look at what you see overall in terms of the trends inside organizations represented by this group of people who are from all different places, different sectors, and what are you noticing when you take a look at this? So just, you know, first hits, what are you noticing that as you think about the different questions, number one being, the first principle was ending injustice. There's a 2.9. Um, the idea of beloved community and building joyful, inclusive, resilient communities at a 3.2, also into sometimes. Um, uh, the idea of compassionate accountability, number three, which is 3.1.
Shakil,
Yeah.
I think we should look at them not individually because the numbers, the difference between the numbers are not that significant.
Mm-hmm.
The real question is why none of them got to fours or five,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the because they hovered around twos or threes
Mm-hmm.
consistently. You see what I'm saying? Throughout the entire survey. So it
Yeah.
looks like we've got a crisis in our organizations where the very things we're talking about identifying as just compassionate requirements and skills simply are not front and center in many of the places we do our human rights and social justice activism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the one that came closest to a four was a 3.5, which is the idea of integrity. That was at a 3.5, that people behave in accordance to the values that they espouse. So that's the closest, but otherwise, that's right. We're at hovering at the three range. So you can drop the screen, James. So with that, let's just open up for reflections and comments. Um, what do you gain by doing that, folks? By going through that kind of a process to think about your organization? What do you gain when you see the trends overall across a broad spectrum of people? We have over 100 people here today, representing different parts of Canada and the U.S. Of different sectors. So just insights. What are you noticing? What's helpful? Love to hear from you. Write something in the chat, and we also take some comments and questions.
While people are doing that, I want to point out that one of the drivers of conflicts within our social justice organizations is the perception that we can't actually have an impact on these global problems that are going on, like what's happening in Gaza and Israel, or what's happening in Sudan and stuff like that. So a lot of people turn their passion for justice inward into their organizations. So maybe I can't do anything about the Middle East, but I can certainly get my boss fired for being toxic, which is one of our favorite words to use internally. And we use a lot of unverifiable declarations of harm. Oh, I can't, you're making me feel unsafe. This perception or this thought is harming me, that kind of thing. And so a lot of our trauma shows up inside of the work that we do. And so I just wanted to point that out too. And again, yes, unsafe is often uncomfortable said. Yes, anytime they experience discomfort, they say, oh, I'm just not feeling safe. Hell, I wish I could go to the gym and exercise without pain, but that's the only way you can grow.
Okay, I see some hands. Tansy, Mai, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Professor Ross. Thank you, Shakil. The thing I notice is just that if people don't see it being modeled, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do it. So that idea that if the values aren't being modeled, then it makes sense that everything else is below the 3.5, right? It can't go higher than what's being modeled. So that's just something I noticed. Um, Professor Ross, one thing I wanted to kind of get your idea on is, at least personally, I tend to try to make the difference between what people are saying, but what I mean by that is like the depth, the deeper intention. So, for example, somebody might not have the language, but I can tell that they're saying something kind. Um, Whereas some people might have the language, but what they mean isn't kind, even though the language is modernly appropriate. What you're saying is actually more racist than the person who just called me the N-word, but who said, you know, you're the first N-word I've met who's so kind and nice, and I want to meet more of them, and now I'm less afraid of my doctor. And like, I've had people do that. And I found that much less hurtful than somebody who has all the correct language but doesn't have any of the respect that goes behind it and isn't willing to open their mind to something they might not have experienced. You know, that person was 80 something years old coming to terms with their racism. And so I found that interesting to look at sometimes the language used, because you brought up that the way you said it was so beautiful. I wish I'd written it down, but it was like the co-opting of language, I believe, or something like that. But I kind of wanted to hear more on that if any of this makes sense to you.
I think the word that I used was the inversion of language coups. When they've actually taken something like the Clean Air Act and given polluters permission to make the air more dirtier, or religious freedom, which is really Christian nationalism, that kind of thing. They're language coups. But what you're talking about is that people are capable of using all of our progressive social justice terms to manipulate others with them. And so, one of the things that we always have to examine, in addition to intent, is motives. What motives are actually driving people? What I find that in a lot of our social justice spaces, people want power over others instead of power with others. And so they will weaponize their knowledge as a way of getting power over people, and then use the call out culture and the cancellation culture as a ways to establish their own power base and their own power trips and stuff. And so I tend to give a lot of credence to people's hearts and intent, much more than their skill with this far left language.
Right, right. Thank you. I know we only got a couple minutes left. Mai, would love your comment.
Well, first of all, Loretta and Shakil, you two are a power duo, and I'm really excited about just how aligned your work is with the work that we're trying to do, and also just how amazing you are at communicating this. So thank you so much. The one question I have about this survey is like, are you thinking about people filling it out in terms of the group, the team that they're immediately working with, like their unit? So if you work at a very gigantic organization, you can think of it as like, what's this, our EDI office, or is it the faculty that we work in, or is it the department, or is it the university? Because I when I answer this, I can only think about it in terms of like the mini little team that I work with. So I wonder what you were thinking when you designed this.
I think it can be used at whatever size or unit you're most connected to and most interested in working with. It's really a conversation starter. If you can sit there and see where are the places where there are points of convergence, but more importantly, where are the places where we really diverge and why? So any instrument like this, I think, is a really good conversation starter. It's not meant to be objective. It's meant to be subjective, to name things that are otherwise hard to name, that go unspoken, so many justice organizations I know are really good at a power analysis, but they have no way of talking about kindness and compassion towards each other, the things that we're seeing. And so this opens up a space for that. So that could be on a team of 10, that could be in a department of 100. It really varies, and it's flexible and adaptable to stimulate conversation. Thank you for all of you joining us. Loretta, thank you for coming in today and hearing. I know that we were also running this to get a sense of people's reactions and responses. So any of the things that you have put into chat will be very helpful for us to both get feedback on the process and also refine our tool and refine our thinking. So thank you so much for joining us. Please stay on the lookout for other information about the tool and where we're going with it and when it's ready for prime time and how you folks can access and use it. We're not quite there yet, but we will be. Loretta, thank you as always for joining. So much fun.
Sorry, I've got a 1 o'clock interview I've got to do. Bye-bye.
Take care. All right, everybody. With that, let's just come off mute and say goodbye. We'll hang out for a couple of minutes if people have any additional questions or comments.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good one.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.